We're pleased to have with us today Patricia DREWS, another mom with Lost Voices of Fentanyl, and she's going to share her story about her beautiful daughter, Heavenly Nelson. So, Patricia, why don't you go ahead and start your story?
Thank you for having me, Mary.
Mhm.
Um, Heavenly was my only child. She was born in Vance County, North Carolina. Um, she was a little social butterfly. Um, when she was in elementary school here, the teachers used to say that they couldn't wait for her to come to school every day to see what she was wearing. She was my little diva. Um, she loved everyone and everyone loved her. She was very outgoing. She was very comical. She loved to make others laugh. Um, when she was in elementary school, her father and I divorced and we moved to Edmonton, Alberta, Canada, um, where I remarried because I'm a dual citizen. Um, so having went to the School of the Arts there, Victoria School of Visual and Performing Arts. She was very smart, and like I said, very, very outgoing. Um, she really enjoyed her time in Canada. Although she was very prissy, she was also the girl that loved to get out and go hunting with her stepfather. She learned how to do the perfect moose call, and I don't know if you've ever heard a moose, but that's one of the
Nope.
most god awful sounds you'll ever hear. But she used to love to. We would ride down the lease roads there, and because Alberta's a big oil country, so
Mm-hmm.
we would ride down all these oil lease roads, and there's absolutely no one around. And if she saw a bull moose, and these things are huge, they get up like 14, 1,500 pounds.
Wow.
But she would let the window down and she'd do that call and call it up to the car. And of course, I would drive away when it got too close, and she thought that that was hilarious. But she's very, very outgoing. And like I said, she did go to the School of the Arts. She loved to draw. She loved to paint. She loved to write. Um, Also, Heaven was the kind of girl that you didn't tell her she couldn't do something. Um, she learned to play the didgeridoo, and when she was on Facebook, some guy told her that only Aboriginal males were allowed to play a didgeridoo. And you just didn't tell her she couldn't do something. So she learned the didgeridoo and she actually mastered it. Heaven was only 5'3", and she weighed 105 pounds. She was teeny tiny her whole life. Um, and it takes a lot to blow one of those things. I don't know if you know what a didgeridoo is. It's a long horn, but she would try to teach me how, and oh my God, I just could not. And she would laugh and she said, well, you have to blow with your stomach. And I'm like, how do you blow with your stomach? But she was the love of my life. She was my everything. My whole universe revolved around her for 24 years. And it's very hard to talk about, you know, how she was just, and I say stolen because that's exactly what happened. She was stolen from me. Um, we moved back to North Carolina when she turned 18. I tried to get her Canadian citizenship straight. And although she was allowed to live in Canada and have all the benefits of a citizen, um, I could not get her citizenship. They said that they no longer offered second generation citizenship, although I am a dual status. My mother is Canadian. My whole one side of the family is Canadian, and she had lived there for 10 years. Well, I could
Wow.
not send my 18-year-old daughter back to North Carolina alone.
Mm-hmm.
We had never been separated more than a day, hardly, her whole life. So we wound up moving back to North Carolina. And that's where the troubles began. When we lived in Edmonton, it was a city of about 1 million people. She had like 300 friends to do stuff with at all times. There was mass transit. She could take the subway, the train, the bus, a cab, and then we moved back to Granville County, North Carolina. And she asked me, she says, Mama, what do I do now? I said, well, for one thing, you better get a driver's license if you're planning to go anywhere. So she did get a driver's license. Lord have mercy, she got 3 speeding tickets back to back. I used to tell her, I said, oh, you need to be a highway patrolman, because one thing about it, nobody can outrun you. But she was something. Heaven, when we lived here, she was raised in the church. I was on the nominating committee at our church, the Baptist Church. She went to Sunday school. We were very active. I taught GAs at church. She was a firm believer in God, and she had a firm belief. But Heaven, she was very, very trusting, and they even preached about that at her funeral, that her trust in others is what caused her demise. My child never left the house that I didn't say to her. I would say, Heaven, choose your friends wisely. And I would always tell her, have fun, be safe, and make smart choices. After we moved home, she wound up going to a party one night. And at this party, Heaven was drugged and raped. That is something that she was never able to come back from. She wound up, she left the party, and this boy, was in the vehicle with her. She went to a store. How she made it to the store, I don't know. But that same boy that was with her. The police officer said that he was sitting in his car and she was in the store, and that he was watching everything that was going on, and said that the boy was trying to grab at her and she was pushing him away and she was falling. And she got outside. She got in the car and he said to himself, he says, please God, don't let this girl start this car. And she did. And when she did, he pulled her. Well, she went to jail. Her father and I got her out. It was 3:00 the next afternoon. I don't know what they gave my child, but it was 3:00 the next afternoon before she could even talk. That's how messed up she was.
Wow.
When she came to enough and was coherent enough to tell me what had happened, she pulled her shirt off, and she pulled her pants off, and she showed me all the bruises, and she told me that she had been raped. So I took her to our local hospital, and we were going to do the rape kit. She went in the back. They wouldn't allow me to go because they said that she was over 18. And, she was back there for quite a while. They came out and they told me that they had the person that handles these cases is in Fayetteville, which is about 2 hours from where we were. And it would be 2 hours or so before they could get there. Heaven was very pretty. And I'm not saying that just because she was mine. She was pretty. But she wasn't just pretty outside. She was pretty inside, And that's, to me, is more important than your outside, your outward appearance. They treated her at the hospital like it was her fault.
No,
she didn't ask for that.
No.
She never asked for any of that. And I have often wondered, had they handled this differently at Granville Hospital? Had they handled it differently, would maybe that have made a difference in her life and a different outcome? She came running out of the room to the waiting area where I was, and she was just boohooing. And she says, let's go, Mama, let's go. And I'm like, no, Heaven, we can't. We have to stay here. We have to do this. And she says, Mama, I can't do it. I cannot do this. She said, if they treat me like this now, how will they treat me when I go to court? So she refused to do the rape kit. From that day forward, We were not allowed to talk about that rape. We were not allowed to mention it. She wound up moving 2 hours away to Greensboro, North Carolina, where she lived for about 2 years
Can I
because
interrupt?
she did not want to be. Yeah.
I'm sorry to interrupt. I just want to ask a question. You said you were not allowed to talk about it. Who would not allow that?
From her.
Her. Okay. All right.
Heaven didn't want to talk about it because in her mind, if you didn't talk about it, it didn't happen, and she didn't have to deal with it. She didn't have to face it. She wound up moving 2 hours away to Greensboro because she did not want to be around those people. She did not want to face those people. She did not want to deal with this in any way. She wanted to act like it never happened, but it ate at my child. It ate at her every day of her life, and I know that it did. One of my friends has a saying, and it's silence is deadly, and that is absolute God's truth in my child's case. I tried to get her counseling. She would go. They'd give her medication for depression and anxiety. She wouldn't take it. She started dabbling in pills. And from dabbling in pills, she started doing other drugs. For 4 long years, anytime my child called, but that was her whole life. Anytime my child called, I ran. That was my child. That was my life. That was my everything. And I tell people, you just didn't kill my child. You killed me too, because a big part of me died that day as well. I will never be who I once was. Yeah, I still laugh. I don't laugh as loud, I still go out, but there's always, and I call it the elephant in the room. There's always, even in your happiest moments, you're thinking, like my grandson that I'm raising. She thank God, she left her son, and I am raising him. He will be my only grandchild, just like she was my only child. But even on his happy days, like, school plays or ball games or amusement parks or Christmas and holidays and everything, even on the happiest days, there's always that there, that missing her, that she should be here. She should see this,
How old was he when she died?
he was 2.5 years old, not quite 3.
Does he remember her much, or do you
He
just keep?
He remembers some, but I have pictures, and I tell him all the time about his mother. And that's a sad thing, too, that people don't take into account, is all the grandparents in this country raising these babies, these children left behind, by this fentanyl crisis. He does understand. I take him to all the events. He gets up and he speaks. He's a very smart little boy, just like his mom was. But it's still, like recently, I was reading a book to him. I read to him every night. And at the end of the story, it was a prayer. And, it mentioned God. And I looked, and he had tears in his eyes. And he says, "I don't want to talk about God right now, Mama." I said, "Well, why not, Cameron?" He said, "Because God has my mama." So I had to explain to him, that God has his mom because she's in, his heavenly kingdom. But God didn't do this. God didn't have anything to do with this. I explained that to other moms too, who are angry at God. Why me? Why my child? God didn't do this. Mexican cartel, China,
Yep.
your local drug dealer. They are the ones that did this. They are the ones that stole our children from us. So like I said, he does know his mother. He talks about his mother all the time. I make sure of that. And that is the one thing that I am adamant about. He calls me mama too, but he knows that she is his mother. And, every child deserves to call somebody mama. They do. Now back to heaven before I be a boohooing. Um, she moved to Greensboro because she didn't want to talk about it. She didn't want to be around these people. She didn't want to have anything to do with it. If you don't talk about it, it didn't happen. Um, she wound up when she moved back here about 2 years later. She met a boy. Um, and that's where things got really bad for her. Um, I've told people before, you know, when it first started, it was like I had stepped on the road to hell. And I say that. But that is a road that I traveled with my child to the very end. When she needed me, I was there. I was there for her. I had finally sent Heaven to a rehab in Kentucky. She had been in and out of rehabs, but this last time I sent her to a rehab in Kentucky. And she left on like January the 7th. She came by my work, and she got out of the vehicle twice, and she hugged me, and she was crying, and she was saying, "But Mama, it's so far away from you. You have to understand, we were never," she knew that anytime she called, I was there. We were never apart. She was my only child. She was everything to me. And like I said, she got out of the vehicle twice, was crying, and she was saying, "But Mama, it's so far from you." And I said, "Heaven, you got to go do this. Get your life back together. And I'll fly out there to see you. I'll bring Cameron to see you. I'll do whatever it takes." But I had no idea that that was the last time I would ever lay eyes on my child alive. Or I would have never let her go. I'd still be holding on to her. She went to the rehab there in Kentucky. And when they got there, they sent her for a psychiatric evaluation. The nurse called me. She spent the first week or so in a psych ward. She told me, she says, "Your daughter has been through things that no mother should ever have to hear." That hurt me to the core. So I know that my child suffered. I know that she did. But someone here in Vance County, next county over, sent me a message while she was in rehab and said that Heaven wanted to come home. I didn't want to bring my child home. I wanted her to stay there, complete the program, and then come home. I told them to stay away from my child, that I did not, if I wanted her back in Vance County on drugs and dead, I'd bring her back myself. Well, this man did not listen to me, and unbeknownst to me, he brought my child back. On January the 28th, 2019, Heaven had sent me a message, and she told me, she says, "Mama," she says, "I'm a changed woman. I'm not as changed as I'd like to be, but I'm getting there." Later on that afternoon, about 3:30, she sent me another message, and she says, "Mama, I love you." I said, "I love you too, Heaven." And our thing was, she would always tell me, she says, she would send me a message out of the blue, a text message. She'd say, "You're a star girl." And we would laugh. That was our thing. "You're a star girl." And the night before she passed, she sent me a text message. She says, "You're a star girl." And I sent her a text back, and I said, "No, you're the star." She said, "No, Mama." She says, "You're a diamond." January the 28th, I had just gotten off the phone with a friend of mine. And I told my friend, I says, for the first time in 4 years, I can close my eyes and sleep. I can breathe because I know that my child is safe because she's in rehab in Kentucky. I had just laid down. Not even 5 minutes later, the phone rang. My fiance at the time got up and he answered the phone. And I heard him say, "God, no." He went in the other room, and he lit a cigarette. I laid there. I think my mind knew what my heart wasn't ready to accept. Nobody calls that late at night, 10:48 p.m. On a Monday night, unless it's bad news. Anyway, he says, honey, you need to come in here. And I laid there and I stared at that ceiling. He said it like 3 or 4 times. You need to come in here. I finally went in and he says, honey, she's gone. I said, who's gone? He said, Heaven, she's gone. And I said, what do you mean she's gone? She left to rehab. He said, no, she's gone. At that moment, that is, there's no way to describe that scream. I hit my knees and I screamed and I screamed, and it is a god awful sound. It is like everything in you has just left. It's hard to explain, but I remember I was screaming and just screaming and screaming, and he says, "You're gonna wake the baby. You're gonna wake Cameron." I didn't care. I didn't care. My whole world had been ripped away from me. Everything I had ever known. You know, my only child was gone. So then you're faced with immediately, you're in a shock, you're in a fog. My first thought was to reach out. I had him call my family. I couldn't get anybody in my family. He called my best friend, and she was there in less than 10 minutes. I immediately started getting dressed because my thing is, I didn't believe it. Part of me didn't want to believe that that was my child. And also, I needed to get there, and I needed to see my child. I needed to hold my child. I needed to tell her that it was okay, that Mama's there, and everything was okay, like I had always done. But the sheriff's department called back. I was already dressed, headed out the door with my friend Patricia, and they said that, no, Miss DREWS, you can't see your child. This is considered a homicide. We'll be sending your daughter for a full autopsy. Just the thought of my child being cut off was another blow. At this time, I didn't know what had happened to my child. They didn't know what had happened to my child. It took 3 more days before I could see my child. And when I did, I asked for everyone when I finally got to the funeral home. Her makeup wasn't right. Her hair wasn't right. It wasn't her. I looked at her and I was like, it's not her. It's not her. But I asked everyone to leave me alone so that I could talk to her. And I did. I held her hand and I told her, it's okay. It's okay. It was almost like I had to give her permission to leave me. This poison has devastated so many families. So many families. And it happens 300 times a day in this country. 300 times a day. A mom, dad gets a phone call or knock at the door telling them, that their child is gone. It's hard. And it's been 5 years for me. Some days it seems like yesterday. Some days it seems like forever since I've seen my child. But something has to be done. We can't keep burying children. It's killing babies, toddlers, teenagers, early 20s. It doesn't discriminate. It's killing a whole generation of young Americans.
I don't have words.
I'm sorry.
It's okay.
But the truth hurts. It hurts.
I know you have written a book. Can you tell us about that?
I did. For 5 years, I have fought for justice for my child. I will never stop fighting for justice for my child. Um, she died in Vance County, North Carolina. Vance County is one of the counties that does not have a single death by distribution prosecution. Although we do have the death by distribution law in the state of North Carolina. Um, the jurisdiction, that carries its 5 counties: Vance, Granville, Franklin, Warren, and Person County. The only of those 5 counties that have ever had a death by distribution, they've had quite a few, is Franklin County. So I stress the fact that every life matters. Every single one of these deaths need to be properly investigated. And we need to get these dealers of death off our streets. So I did this book. The cover is at the first Lost Voices of Fentanyl rally at the Chinese embassy. I waited all day long because it was hot. It was July. I waited all day long for that limp Chinese flag, for the wind to catch it and it stands straight up. Finally, a storm came up, a black cloud, and that flag stood out straight perfectly. Um, and that's when I got the picture. But if you notice too, the casket here, and on that casket is the sign that says the Fentanyl Highway, the Fentanyl Taxi, and that's where it ends. And like I said, it doesn't just affect those with a substance use disorder. It affects, you know, so many people, so many families. The reason I wanted to do that book is because, and every one of those stories in this book is written by the mother. We carried those children for 9 months. We educated those children. We nurtured those children. Those children were part of us. Those children were our everything, our everything. And for them to just be poisoned and ripped away from us, that's why I wanted a mother to tell it. I wanted her perspective. I wanted everyone to tell their child's story, because every life matters.
So if someone wants to purchase that book, how would they do that?
When I did that book, I did self-publishing. I did it all myself. And I probably printed 350 of them. I did sell some to make back some of my money. But most of those books, what I did, I gave to politicians. I gave them to politicians because I want them to see. I mailed one to Donald Trump. I sent one to Joe Biden. I've sent them to North Carolina state senators. I sent one to Chip Roy.
Texas.
I sent them, to every politician I could possibly think of that may try to do something to help us. So, I haven't published any more lately. I've thought about republishing them and putting them on Amazon or something. But I don't really want to make money. It's not about the money.
No.
It's about putting an end to this. That's what I want.
So some of the other moms that I have interviewed have said the 2 calls to action they would like to see. Number 1 is to have the drug cartels deemed a terrorist organization, which they should be. The other thing the other thing they have said is to have fentanyl itself declared a weapon of mass destruction. I think those are 2 powerful things that need to happen. Is there anything else that you would want to add to that as we close today?
Well, and the de minimis loophole, close the de
Yes,
minimis
yes,
loophole.
yes.
We have over 3 million packages coming to this country from China. These packages need to be checked. No package should be coming into this country from China without being checked, And also, I'd like to say one thing to this administration. I have thought about this and I have thought about this, and I see it every day. I get on social media and I see a GoFundMe from a mom or a family, struggling, trying to bury their child or their loved one. We aren't prepared to bury our children. This is not the natural order of things. We should not be burying our 20-something-year-olds or teenagers, babies and toddlers. Should not be happening.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing I'd like to say to this administration is, if you're not going to help us protect them by closing the southern border, by closing the de minimis loophole, there's so many things that you could be doing. If you're not going to help us protect them, for God's sakes, help us bury them, because we're not prepared. We're not prepared.
You don't expect that.
No.
You don't plan for that.
You don't plan for that. And then the devastation left behind, the children, the orphans left behind, the devastated families. Who's helping them? No one. No one except our organizations. Lost Voices of Fentanyl. I have Forgotten Victims of North Carolina. There's Fentanyl Victims Network of North Carolina. We have so many that I could, name that are there for these families.
Well, I thank you for sharing an incredibly painful story. I truthfully was not prepared for this, but it's okay. It's impactful to me, and I know it's going to be impactful to our listeners. And I thank you for sharing from your heart, even though it was painful for you. I thank you for your bravery.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
It was my pleasure.
And thank you for what you're doing.
I'm not doing much. You are the one that's doing it. And I'm just, running a camera. That's nothing. So
thank you.
Thank you, Patricia.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.